And if this is your first time joining us, welcome. My name is Beverly, and I'm the Communications Manager for People's Memorial Association. We're the oldest and largest memorial society here in the US. We were founded back in 1939 here in Seattle, so we're celebrating our 85th birthday this year, which is very exciting. We provide funeral education and advocacy services to all Washingtonians. And to date, over 220,000 folks have become members of PMA, and of those, about 71,000 of them are currently living. So, as you can imagine, our meager staff of four stays very busy in the office doing work that we're very passionate about. And when we think about what that work is, well, education and advocacy. Like I said, we're doing community classes just like this, as well as hosting a real bevy of free resources on our website, our Instagram, our Facebook. You can even catch some stuff over on our TikTok. If I could ever get my colleagues to learn some dance choreography, we could probably build a more robust presence there, but you just keep your eyes peeled. In terms of advocacy, well, we work really hard to support our state level legislature in increasing funeral choices, increasing price transparency in a notoriously opaque industry, as well as protecting cultural rights. If you've even spent a minute here in Washington, you know that we are blessed to have an incredible diversity of peoples with all kinds of different important social, spiritual, emotional, and cultural practices, especially tied into mourning and celebrating the lives of those we've lost. And all of those folks deserve equal access to affordable cremation, burial, aquamation, and natural organic reduction. I think I'll go ahead and skip over this slide, but if this is something that resonates with you, we're happy to take questions anytime about membership benefits of becoming PMA, but it's important to know that the core essential educational stuff is available to the community for free. And if you're not familiar, Ducks in a Row is actually a three-part series. And this week is our first session. We'll be coming back on the 14th and the 21st to continue. We have a session on estate planning and also a session on advanced directives for healthcare. So we're trying to cover kind of all of the concerns in the broad sense, all of the concerns that you might have at end of life, help you get that core information you need to get your wishes organized down in writing and start having important conversations with your loved ones to make sure that you get the kind of care that you really want for yourself. And it can be a big project, but we are here to help. So this is usually the part where I hand it over to my guest speaker, but today you're stuck with me, just the, boring old communications manager, but this is a subject that I'm really passionate about, and I hope to help resolve some maybe misconceptions we might have and help empower you to find some things that are really meaningful and resonate with you. So I'm excited to share some education with you today. So I'm going to swap over slides real quick. And let's see. All right, there we go. So funeral options 2.0. I like to start off with kind of a controversial thing. I like to remind folks that death is not an emergency, which if you've grown up in the States is it's a pretty controversial thing to say because we've all kind of grown up with this idea that when a death occurs, everything is on a clock. You've got to go, go, go. You've got to make phone calls. You've got to get that body out of your home. You've got to get them to the funeral home. You've got to get that body in the ground. Everything feels very urgent. And the fact of the matter is, it doesn't need to be like that. And one of the ways that we can help to kind of work against that urgency and that panic is by talking about these things before we need access to them so that we have more time, to find things that are really important and meaningful to us that, fit within our resources and our needs. And so I just kind of would like you to keep this in the back of your mind, because I think at the beginning, this feels like a wild thing to say, but hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll kind of understand a little bit of what I mean by it. So I find that one of the most important core things for people to understand is, what's the point of a funeral home? Which might sound like kind of a silly question, but, it's important to understand. So the funeral home in Washington, you don't actually have to work with them necessarily when a death occurs. But I will say that they certainly bring a few things to the table that are going to make your life a little bit easier. I like to think of them as sort of dividing their work into two halves. There's the part that we all know, this is the person that handles and cares for a body from the place where a death occurs all the way through what we call their final disposition, whether that person chooses cremation or maybe they end up buried in a cemetery, any of those things. The funeral home is responsible for that. I would argue the part that they're much more useful for sometimes can be the paperwork. It is exceptionally stressful to navigate your way through the sort of tsunami of paperwork that you might be encountering when a loved one dies. And these folks, they're experts, and they can really help lessen that burden on your family. So since in Washington you're not legally required to work with a funeral home, you get to decide to what degree they support you and your loved ones. And so you can say, you know what, I'm going through a lot right now, and I really would love an expert to handle all of this. Or maybe you would like the chance to be more hands-on and do different things to help care for your loved ones. And we can talk a little bit about some of those later in the presentation, but you've got options. I think the big takeaway here, though, is you always want to remember that that funeral director that you're meeting with at the funeral home, they work for you. So you want to treat this like any other business relationship. They might be the expert in the things that they do, but they're not an expert in the things that you need. So we're wanting you to go ahead and put some thought into, am I getting the things that I need? Do I feel pressured to make choices? Am I finding things that are inside my budget? We've got some good tips here to help you kind of navigate that relationship. But if there's at any point you feel like you're not getting what you need, there are so many funeral homes, especially here in Washington. There's over 200 of them. So there's definitely going to be a business out there that can support you in the way you're looking for. So you're allowed to leave at any time and find someone that's a better match for you. One of the biggest stressors that I find that folks don't quite know how to ask is the concern about the financial responsibility. They know, even if you're not, well educated on this subject, you're probably pretty stressed about how much all of this stuff is going to cost. And we're going to definitely delve into a few of those numbers today so we can help you kind of do a little bit of financial planning. But, if you're wondering who is the person that is responsible for paying for my care, well, we made this little flow chart for you to clarify, according to Washington state law, who is your next of kin when a death occurs. So the top of the chart here is going to be someone called a designated agent, and this person is kind of like your power of attorney for death care. Beyond that, it would be your legal spouse, the majority of your adult children after that. If you don't have kids, then it would go to your surviving parents. If your parents have passed, it would pass to your siblings, and then it goes all the way down to a court-appointed guardian. For lots of people, this flow, kind of how the state thinks of your family works just fine. But a lot of us come from, less traditional families, or even if you have all these people, maybe you're thinking, the thing I love about my spouse, the reason I married them is not that they're good at paperwork, so this is your chance to pick someone else that can handle all the tasks that come along with the death and free up your loved ones to kind of handle the weight of your loss. I know in my particular case, the state of Washington would turn to my parents in the event that I passed. And I'm thinking that if I die before my parents, they're probably going to be feeling some kind of way about that. And so in my case, my designated agent is my best friend. I know she knows my values. She knows what I want. I know she's smart with money. She's got a good education. And after all these years, she's really a member of the family. So I know she can really go toe to toe with my mom if there is any disagreement on the way I should be cared for. As a consideration, I've also made her a partial beneficiary on my life insurance in case my mom says anything especially mean to her. She can afford for a little bit of therapy after the fact. But I bring this up just to highlight how much control you can have over the way you're cared for. You don't have to work within this conventional framework if it's not a good reflection of your needs. So it's something important to kind of keep in the back of your mind. And again, I know there's a lot happening on this chart. I'm going to make sure that you have access to these slides so you can refer back to them anytime. And all of this information is also available on our website at People's Memorial for free. So there's a couple of legal documents that I think you're going to find very helpful in getting those wishes organized and down in writing. Both of these forms you can see up on the screen are available for free on our website. And, if you have any issue getting those printed out, you can also give us a call in the office. We're happy to mail you a copy. On the left is that designated agent that I alluded to, and this is that form that you're going to use to kind of help spell out who's the person that's allowed to run point on decisions about your care after you've passed. Many people say to me, oh, I'm not worried about that. I've got a power of attorney. But the fact of the matter is, in Washington and in many other states, power of attorney expires at the time of death. And so you might have a person that you would like to be making those decisions, but their ability to make decisions expires, unfortunately, when you do. So this can be a really useful tool for protecting that. On the right-hand side, you can see something called a disposition authorization. And this legal form is how you spell out how you want your body cared for. And it's a couple pages long, and it gives you a lot of space to sort of flesh out the things you do or don't want. And sometimes people feel a little bit intimidated by it. It's got some legal language on it. There's a lot of questions, maybe some questions that you're not too excited to be pondering, but it can really be a helpful tool to kind of get you to understand the things that your loved ones are going to ultimately be making decisions about. So you can use this form in whatever way you want. You can, I oftentimes tell people if you're one of those folks that really wants people to keep it simple and not make a big fuss and spend a lot of money, it's almost more valuable for you to use a form like this than to go ahead and go through this process if you have elaborate plans, because it's really easy when someone cares for you to be sort of pressured into, socially pressured into going all out, to show their love. They might know objectively that what you wanted was something simple, but they might feel like they're not doing enough. So when you put these things down in writing, it provides that valuable guidance, makes it crystal clear what your needs are. So if you just want something simple, just cremate me. My niece knows where to scatter me. You can use the form that way. But I've also seen people write out elaborate plans and attach multiple pages to this, and you certainly can. If you've got strong feelings like the dress that I want to be buried is in a garment bag on the left-hand side of the closet, and I've got my heart set on that baby pink casket with the Last Supper painting on the inside, and I've got these poems and these songs I want played, and my flowers, and don't you dare let Susan come to the funeral. She knows what she did in 1977. This is your chance. This is really all about your wishes, and I encourage you to not be shy about what those might be, because your loved ones aren't going to know unless you tell them. So here in Washington, we have what I like to call sort of an embarrassment of riches in terms of death care options. We have 5 legal things that you can do with your body after you die. You can be cremated, of course. You can be buried. Many people choose full body donation, where they donate themselves to science. And we also have alkaline hydrolysis and natural organic reduction. And we're going to talk a little bit about each of these options today. So hopefully you can get a little more information and find something that's a good fit for your needs. And I hope you'll humor me. I kept in some of these comics with these snowmen in them. I inherited the slideshow from a colleague, and they had a real penchant for these, and they've really grown on me over the years. And I think they help keep the mood a little lighter. So I hope these give you a little giggle. So one of the things that we do at People's Memorial is every other year we contact all of the funeral homes in Washington, and we gather information on the services they offer and what the cost of those services are. And we squish them all together, we put them up on our website, and those are available to the public. And our vision is that this saves you some phone calls and some stress, so that, when you're experiencing a loss, you're not trying to drive all over town and spend your whole day on the phone. This is really just to kind of help you zero in on things. So because we've been doing this price survey for so many years, we have a lot of interesting data about the costs that are associated with care. So here in Washington, cremation is far and away the most popular option. The numbers I'm going to share with you are from 2022, but I will be able to share 2024 numbers with you in the coming weeks. So I encourage you to stay in touch with us. So right now, these are just ballpark figures. So as of 2022, the average cost of a cremation here in Washington was just over $1,600. An interesting thing we noted was that the cost variation between the most affordable and the most costly cremation here in Washington, it was 770% variation, which is stunning. It's not like the folks on the highest end are providing, high tea and pinkies out while they're doing their work. It's the same service, likely the same equipment and everything. It's just there's that much variation in the marketplace. And I hope that this can help to persuade you of the value of doing some comparison shopping, because it can really be a game changer for your family. The other really common option here in Washington is a direct burial. And this is just a burial where there's not, a ceremony or a graveside or a mass said. It's just a simple burial. We found that average cost was over $3,100, and this doesn't include the cost of a cemetery plot. So these are some big numbers, and I suspect that maybe there's a few of you here today that might be surprised by how large these numbers are. One thing that I think is noteworthy is between our price survey in 2020 and 2022, we found that 71% of funeral homes increased their cost. So if you are crossing your fingers and praying to your deity that these prices are going to drop by the time you need to access them, I hope that this convinces you that things are only going up. So it's only going to become more important to do your research, make sure you're finding something that's within your budget. So like I said, cremation is generally what Washingtonians pick. It's right around 80 to 82% of folks here in Washington. And the number one reason is that it's the most affordable way to care for someone after they've died. The number two reason, which I think is kind of interesting and unique to the Pacific Northwest, is that up until recently, it was the most ecologically friendly option. We've if you've spent any time up here, this is sort of the mecca for us irredeemable tree huggers, and this is a big concern for folks. So we actually have some other options that we're going to be able to introduce you to today that you might have heard of, and can offer you some other alternatives if you're one of those people that is really kind of concerned about what can I do to go green. I included this image here just to kind of give you an idea of the variety of products in the marketplace. That one on the left, the red one, is probably just about the most popular urn that at least I've seen. And it's so funny because I just look at it and I think I've never known a single person that belongs in that urn. It's so buttoned up and it's so serious. It's very elegant, but if you're one of those folks that, you're in a funeral home and you're planning for a loved one and you're looking at all the products sitting up on their shelves and you're seeing these items and you're thinking, gosh, this doesn't seem at all like my sweet little grandma or my hilarious dad. You're not alone, and you don't have to purchase products in funeral homes. There's actually a federal law that says, you can find products in this merchandise anywhere, and the funeral home has to use it. So if you want to do some shopping around to find something that, is a better fit for who your loved one was, you've got a lot of really great options. And a lot of people don't know this can also be a great way to save a lot of money. And I know it sounds kind of weird, but the two places that most people turn to for products like this are Costco and Amazon. And the joke I always hear from people is, oh, if I want to buy my casket or my urn on from Costco, do I have to get 6 of them to get the deal? No, you don't, luckily. I've heard that their selection isn't very wide, but I have heard their customer service is excellent. And so, shipping a casket across the country, it's, kind of a delicate process. So if it were to show up with some scratches in it, I've heard that the folks at Costco are excellent with helping resolve any issues that might have happened with anything you've ordered. Alternatively, again, it probably seems kind of weird to be on Amazon, with your shopping cart with your cat food and, your witty t-shirts and then be like, oh, I'll throw a casket in. But the fact of the matter is, it's a wonderful way to see a huge volume of products, really find something, zero in on something that fits your individual needs. And again, do some comparison shopping, because generally in a funeral home, there's only room to hold so many products. And it's really just a cross section. And it's really common to have them, mark those products up pretty substantially. So if you're not seeing something in the funeral home that resonates with you, you have the legal right to shop around. So I find that generally lots of folks know quite a bit about cremation. So I thought I would just tackle a couple of really common questions that I get about it, and then we'll move on. The first is that there's, some people feel that cremation can be sort of a cold and clinical way of caring for a body, but there's a lot of really beautiful ways that you can build your family or your religious community into that process and have some, meaningful ceremony. So, you just need to talk with your funeral director about what your needs are, and you might be surprised the ways that they can accommodate you. Like I found, I want to say that it's Hindus that have this tradition where it's supposed to be like the oldest son in a family is supposed to be the last person that touches their parents before they, go into the afterlife. And you might hear about that practice and think, gosh, how could you possibly make that work in an American funeral system? But maybe the way that you do that is that you have what's called a witness cremation, where your loved ones are there when you enter the machine to be cremated. They don't see anything gruesome, but in order to accommodate that need, that cultural need, maybe that oldest son is the person that presses the button that moves the body into the machine. And this can be an incredibly powerful way to meet those spiritual requirements and also, work within the existing framework. So, there's a lot of possibility there, I think, with finding ways to personalize these services to meet the needs of your family. If you want to place special items with your person to be cremated with them, there's a lot of wonderful ways you can do that. There's not that many restrictions on it. I think it's just the glass and batteries are the things that generally you can't put in there, but letters and photos and books, those are all really easy things. I remember a family that we worked with at one point where they sent their grandfather in with his like favorite little lap blanket and his number one grandpa ball cap on and his favorite James Patterson novel under his arm. And for that family, that was a wonderful way to honor, who he was to them. But make sure you touch base with your funeral home just in case they might have some rules about kind of what that process looks like. I know that they had to make some rules about the batteries one because right at the turn of the millennium, back when cell phones were less ubiquitous and more of a status symbol, there were a lot of very self-important businessmen that insisted on entering eternity with their Blackberries. And so it turns out that, it's kind of dangerous to cremate electronics like that. Could damage the equipment. So But, that's kind of a small subset of the things that you might be inclined to cremate your loved one with. So that process takes about 4 to 6 hours. It kind of depends on the individual and kind of the composition of their body. Um, One question that we get shockingly frequently, it continues to be one of the number one reasons that people visit our website, is that they're curious about what happens to gold fillings after a cremation. And if you too have been secretly curious about this, I will tell you that it's not recoverable. The gold in dental fillings is actually an amalgam. Gold itself is very soft, and so you need to mix it with a bunch of other things to make it tough enough to stand up to a lifetime of snacking. And so the actual amount of gold in there is quite small. And through the process of the cremation, that filling is just going to burn up and just be like a little crunchy black nugget. If for some reason, maybe you have sentimental reasons for wanting it back, you can talk with your funeral director about that. I will say that you'll have to hire a specialized kind of dentist to extract those fillings before the process takes place. So it's going to be very costly. So it's not exactly a good investment. So if you were thinking, aha, I've got my retirement hidden right in my mouth, I want you to manage your expectations about that. But if there are kind of kooky things that you're curious about, reach out to your funeral director. I guarantee they've heard something weirder than whatever you're about to ask them. People ask for all kinds of things. I've met lots of families where they've asked for hardware back. I met an engineer once who wanted his mom's titanium hip back because he remembered, it was maybe an early version, and when she walked it squeaked a little bit, and so he was just kind of tickled by this little thing that he just associated with his mom, and he wanted it back for his own reasons. So people want all kinds of things, and there's nothing wrong with you and the things that are meaningful to you. So I really want you to feel safe and comfortable talking with your funeral director about those things. Generally, here in Washington, at least, the most popular way that people kind of handle cremated remains is scattering. And there's lots of different ways that you can go about this. Sort of the more fully fleshed out version of the law is available on our website if you're curious about it. You can, scatter on public lands with certain restrictions. It's generally considered terribly bad manners to do a scattering on land that doesn't belong to you. So make sure that you're reaching out to whoever that is. I mentioned that because there's a couple of sort of popular places that people will try to sneakily do scatterings, and it doesn't ever seem to go as well as maybe you might hope. Disneyland is one of those places, and they've got very strict rules about doing scatterings there, and they have really robust procedures in place to shut rides down and sanitize them and everything. So you might be thinking like, oh, no one's going to notice, but I just would ask that you please be considerate of others with whatever you decide. Many Washingtonians really want to do scatterings on parklands. And so that's absolutely an option. I would encourage you to reach out to a park ranger or the administrative staff of those national and state parklands and ask them if there's any guidelines they might have. They might ask that you not do the scattering at the trailhead, or they might ask you to step a certain number of feet off of the trail, just best practices. Water scatterings, though, it seems, are probably more popular here in kind of the Puget Sound area. And in Washington, you can scatter on any navigable waterway, which is just one that's moving. So, rivers and oceans and sounds are workable, but, ponds and puddles, not great. So many people aren't aware that this service exists, but it's sort of the quintessential Seattle experience would be to have your remains scattered from a ferry, which is lovely. And if you reach out to those folks in advance, they can actually help you kind of have a ceremony. When you make those arrangements in advance, they actually will stop the vessel. They'll sound the horn. They'll ask for a moment of silence while you do the scattering, and they'll even record the GPS coordinates of where that took place and give it to you on a certificate. So if you want, you can come visit the exact place where you scattered your loved one, and that can be a really wonderful opportunity. So kind of in that spirit, I thought we'd talk a little bit about alkaline hydrolysis. Since this process is, you might have heard it called one of these names that are up on the screen. It's kind of a cremation of sorts, but it uses water instead of flame. So a lot of times you'll hear this called aquamation or green cremation, and these are all just kind of brand names. Legally, the state of Washington calls it alkaline hydrolysis. And so I've included this image up here just so you can kind of get an idea of what this looks like, because it is a newer disposition option that, people are curious about. I think one of the most interesting things about it is you can see on the front, there's that submarine door. They use the exact same kind of door to get an airtight seal. And this really helps with creating the sort of air pressure within to help aid the decomposition process. So if you're curious how this works, there's this combination between high pressure water flow, temperature, and alkaline chemicals that help accelerate the natural decomposition that would otherwise happen in our body. So there were a lot of really cheeky misconceptions about this process, and I've seen some of them persist. So I thought I'd tackle a few of those. When people first hear about this, sometimes they might think like, "Oh, you're gonna boil my grandma." It's really not like that. The way that the process really relies on the high pressure that's gained from that airtight seal on the door. So the water used isn't boiling; it's just warm. The other thing I've heard is sometimes people will say, "Oh, you're going to dissolve me in a vat of acid like in a mob movie," but it's nothing that exciting, I promise. To be pedantic about it, these are alkaline chemicals, which are on the other end of the pH spectrum from acids in the first place. And also, it's really only a small percentage, depending on the composition of your body, somewhere between 5 and 15% of the total volume of what's in the machine is actually that alkaline chemical. So it's overall a pretty small percentage. Here's just a couple more images to kind of help you wrap your mind around this process. You can kind of see what a real machine looks like and then sort of a mock-up of what it's like when a person is inside. And I don't mean to be gruesome. I hope this isn't making you too uncomfortable, but I do find that so many people really just want cold, hard facts about this stuff so they can make up their mind. And you can kind of just get an idea. Just a single person goes in there, there's an airtight seal, and the water breaks the body down. And I think it's a natural question to be really curious, like what on earth does this look like at the end of the process? And what you're going to get back is ashes that are very similar to cremated remains. They look a little bit different since there's no burning that's happening. There's no carbon discoloration, so it's a lot whiter and a lot more powdery. The texture of cremated remains is often a little bit more gritty, like almost like cat litter, I suppose. But, these are remarkably similar remains that are returned to you, and you can do all of the same things with them. If you want to do a scattering, you can do a scattering. You can get a nice urn and, keep the urn on your mantle. You can even get some of those like kooky products maybe you've seen online where it's like you'll get the ashes pressed into a record or turned into a diamond or shot into space. You can do all of those same things with alkaline hydrolysis versus, a conventional cremation. And I'd like to show you a photo kind of what those look like, just again, to kind of help with the education process. I don't want to be gruesome, but just to kind of give you an idea of what to expect. You will get a little bit more of the remains back after the alkaline hydrolysis, just because the water breakdown, there's less of a loss of that bone mass that you would experience from a cremation. So these remains are completely safe to touch and handle. Like I said, you can do a scattering if you'd like. It's an extremely effective way to remove pathogens. I got to do a kind of in-depth research project around this recently, and the World Health Organization and the UN and UNICEF and a bunch of other international organizations recommend this process actually to dispose of medical waste because it's so safe and so effective. So if that's something that you're concerned about, don't worry, this has been extremely well researched. So here's kind of some of the reasons that people might opt for this versus other types of death care. One of the biggest ones is kind of the symbolic side. People really like the idea of a process that feels more gentle or more respectful. A colleague of ours tells this story of a Catholic priest that he met and kind of taught about this process. And he likes to tell the story because it's so interesting the way that the man pointed out that he thought it was kind of beautiful how, you enter the world in this sort of like warm waters of your mother's womb. And it only makes sense that when your life has completed that you'll leave the earth in kind of a similar environment. So that's kind of a beautiful symbolism. If you're a tree hugger like me, perhaps the part that more speaks to you is something like the zero emissions of greenhouse gases and the much lower energy consumption. This last data point, there's a whole bunch of scientists still duking it out, but it's somewhere between like 1/6 and 1/18 the carbon footprint of cremation, but they're still fighting about it. But we're not using natural gas for this, and it's a lot less electricity needed. But there are some scientists that are working to make this process more efficient so that it doesn't rely on quite so much water, because that certainly is a flaw in the process. It does use a decent amount of water. My understanding is that it takes about the amount of water that you would normally use over the course of 2 days. So there's some room for improvement, just like with anything. And I think it's really exciting that I have to find a new map because there's even more states that have legalized this option. This map shows the green states where it's been legalized, and then blue are regions where there's legislation under consideration. But The last time I checked, it's actually over half of the states in the US have legalized this option, which is really wonderful. It really speaks to how excited consumers are for, an expansion of options. The conventional death care options aren't going anywhere. Cremation and burial are extremely meaningful practices for so many people. They're never going to go away. But there's a subsection of the population who hasn't felt well served by those options. And so this really speaks to the excitement that consumers have to have more choices. And, if you're maybe feeling a little closed off to this idea because it seems a little bit newfangled in space age, that's okay. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. As a nonprofit, we have no opinions. We just have information. And I just want you to have as much information as necessary to make an informed choice. So if you don't want to do it, that's fine. But I thought I would share with you that this isn't a new or an untried technology. The first patent for this process actually was filed in the late 1800s. This process was actually used to care for livestock for quite a while and has been in use with people, I want to say, since the 90s. And I included some schools down here on the bottom. These are well-respected institutions. These med schools have been using this process to care for the bodies that have been donated to their med schools. And this process has been in place for a really long time. So I want to say since I found some like early stuff from the late 90s, early 2000s where med schools were starting to implement this. But it's, I kind of like to think generally if something is good enough for the Mayo Clinic, it might be good enough for me, but, call me old fashioned. I like to share this image as much as possible because it never fails to make me laugh. This is my colleague, Dion Strummer. He's retired now, which is such a shame because he was exactly as much fun to work with as you imagine from this picture. He was instrumental in the legalization of this option down in Oregon. And when his machine was delivered, he obviously had to model it for everyone. So just kind of a fun little other view of this machine. So, of course, the underpinning question we always have about everything is, okay, this sounds lovely, but how much does it cost? Well, as of 2022, already 27% of Washington funeral homes were offering this. This process was only legalized in our state in 2019. And so already we saw a quick adoption of this by funeral homes. And we're expecting that in our 2024 data, this number will have risen even higher. We found back in 2022 that the lowest prices we could find for this were $995, and it ranged all the way up to almost $4,000. The average kind of hovered about $2,000, which is it's a couple $100s more, which certainly can, make the difference for many families. But if you're one of those people that was choosing cremation because of the perceived environmental benefits of it, this might make more sense for you. It's comparably priced and certainly has it gets you a lot closer to your goal of a greener funeral option. And frankly, I think, my theory is that maybe within the next 20 years, we're going to see aquamation in Washington become more popular than cremation just because of the subset of people. Oh, yeah. So my colleague Emily here was just mentioning, you can actually also do this process for your pets. The folks out at Resting Waters in West Seattle, that pet funeral home was actually really instrumental in us helping get this process legalized for people. It was one of the ways that we had so much data about the safeness of the process, which is just really fabulous. And also, it's just such a great little local business. If you don't already know about them, you got to check them out. So just in case I've made you deeply uncomfortable with all of these crazy new things, I thought I would bring us back to the safety of something we all know about already, and that's full body burial. Again, this is something people are often quite familiar with, so I don't want to get too deep into this. I thought I would just share some common things that people don't know about this, just to make sure you have all the information that you need. It's important to know that here in Washington, we are in the minority of states where you cannot be buried on your own property. You can only be buried in an established cemetery. If you do have a piece of land that you would like to be buried on, there is a process through that municipality where you have to file to have your land zoned as a cemetery. And that can be a little bit complicated. So if you have your heart set on doing this, make sure that you've communicated with your loved ones about it and potentially consider filing that paperwork ahead of time because, depending on where you live, it can be really expensive to do that filing, or there might just be quite a lot of bureaucracy to contend with. And so it might be advantageous to do that on the front end. Many people are surprised by this, and so it's important to know ahead of time. One of the biggest misconceptions I come across with respect to burial is that many people think that embalming is actually legally required. And that's actually not the case in any state in the country. There's, again, a federal law. There's only one federal law that governs the entire funeral industry, which is so bizarre to me. It's called the Funeral Rule, and it was passed in 1984. Here at PMA, we got to be pretty heavily involved in that legislation, so that was something we're always ready to talk about. It's very important, the work that it does to protect consumers' rights. And one of those rights is to choose whether or not you want to be embalmed. So there are certainly situations in which embalming would be recommended. Many funeral homes prefer that you choose that if, you want to have a viewing where your casket might be open, but you get to make that decision whether or not you would like it. And for many people, embalming is a very significant and important practice. And in those cases, absolutely pursue it. And that's what we want, just for you to get what you need. But if it's something that makes you a little bit uncomfortable or just completely doesn't resonate with your values, you're under no legal obligation to do it. And then the last thing is that national cemeteries are free for veterans. And I thought I'd include a photo here. This is Tahoma. This is our veterans cemetery here in Washington. And gosh, can you just imagine spending eternity with a view like that? Like, just how lovely is that? I mention this though because it's important to know, and I find that many people, their expectations are maybe not the most accurate on this one. I talk to many families where they say, oh, I just love all the information you share, but it doesn't matter to me at all because I'm a veteran and everything's taken care of. But it's important to know that, it's the plot in the cemetery at the veteran cemetery that's free. It's not the care of your body or the casket or the transportation or any of those other costs. And so it's really important that if you are a veteran or you are in the immediate family of a veteran that might be receiving death benefits, that you contact the Veterans Administration well in advance to clarify what sort of benefits you're entitled to, because I do find that just a troubling number of families are really, really disappointed by the reality of the benefits they receive. They have a really complex algorithm at the VA where they determine how much money your family receives, where, it's, if you die in active combat versus, if you die from a service-related injury, it's really complicated. And you got to reach out to them directly to get information on what those benefits are, because the benefits that you may or may not receive are reimbursements. So you will still be liable for the cost of the care of your loved one. And then you have to seek reimbursement later on. And so many people are shocked by that and, really frazzled by having to find money for care that they expected that would be covered. So one thing that's really exciting is that there's a lot of ways to kind of honor different sort of traditions that our families might have about funerals while still kind of making it match up with who you are and kind of bringing it into a more modern sense. And it's kind of interesting because oftentimes we talk about green burial as though it's sort of like a new age thing. But if anything, it's really sort of returning to the way that we did death care in America before the Civil War. So it's really exciting. There's a lot of interesting stuff here. There's not really a legal definition of green burial, so you kind of get to decide what are the parts that you're concerned about. And it's available legally here in Washington. Generally, when we're talking about green burial, what we're saying is that this is a person that's not chemically embalmed. Oftentimes, their body is in a biodegradable container. Maybe it's a casket made from natural materials like unfinished wood or seagrass or something. Or maybe they're placed directly in the ground. Some people are placed in handmade shrouds, and that's a beautiful way to really be in contact with the earth. And a lot of places, if you are interred in a green cemetery, they might require you to use rocks or natural plants instead of kind of conventional headstones or things like that. And I included this photo because if you didn't know what you were looking at, you would have no idea what you're looking at is a cemetery. There's some really interesting work being done, some really beautiful work to find ways for us to, come up with death care that honors and nourishes the environment. And that can be a really wonderful opportunity through green burial. Personally, I'm really excited about this thing called conservation burial. And so there's places around the country that are able to find land that may or may not be exploited, but it's certainly, at risk. And they're able to get it zoned as a cemetery, which prevents it from ever being developed on in the future. And if you're very mindful and strategic of the way that you do the burials there, it can be a wonderful way to restore that land, create a protected place for certain types of wildlife and flora and fauna and all that good stuff. So this is a really wonderful space where there's a lot of great work happening. And I thought I'd share a couple of images. Maybe if you're not familiar with this stuff, you're trying to think like, what on earth is a casket of natural materials? This one up on the top left, this is a woven seagrass casket, and it's lovely. Down on the bottom, this is a handmade shroud. This is actually an extremely popular product. I've seen quite a few times, and you can see One of the things I think is most interesting about it is that there's handles on the side. And this is kind of one of those opportunities that you have to be more hands-on in the care of a loved one. I've noticed since, I've been a PMA for 6 years, and I've noticed that there's been kind of a shift where people are looking more towards something that we call participatory death care, where for many generations now in the United States, we really look to funeral directors and funeral homes as experts on death care. But many people, after being separate for so long, and many of us lost loved ones due to COVID, and we didn't get to grieve or mourn the ways that we're used to. And now, when we get the chance, we want to be there. We want to be engaged. We want to be doing something with our hands that gives back. And so many people are asking, what can we do to be helpful and engaged? And the handles on the shroud are there so that if your loved ones want to be involved in the digging of your grave and the lowering you into it and the physically filling it in, there's this chance for them to do that. And for many families, it's an incredibly powerful opportunity. So there's a couple of important things that you should know about cemeteries if burial is one of those things you're interested in. You should know, when you purchase a plot in a cemetery, that what you're purchasing is the right to burial. You're not the owner of the land. So this means, unfortunately, that since the cemetery does own the land, they make the rules. So they can restrict the use of the plot in a lot of different ways. They could set a limit on the number of burials per plot, which might seem sort of obvious to the uninitiated, but there are certainly cemeteries that do things like double depth graves. So a couple might purchase a single plot, and the person that passes first is buried lower. And then when the second person passes, they're buried above. And that's a pretty common thing. But if you didn't pay accordingly, they can prevent you from doing that. And I've encountered some families where they thought they would try to, subvert the rules a little bit. And maybe one partner was cremated and the other wanted to be buried. And so the one that's buried says, put the urn of my spouse in there with me and we'll just sneak in. I love this in the spirit of undermining authority, but, that's one of those things where the cemetery can say, that's two people and you paid for one, nice try. They can also set different rules around the kind of products that you use relating to your body. They could require a cement vault, which is sort of like almost, I guess, like a shoebox that goes around your casket. And a lot of times I find, will sell this to consumers as being a way to protect you. They'll say, like, the cement vault is going to protect water from seeping into your casket or keep the creepy crawlies out. But that's not how cement works. And, your body will break down even with the absolute most impeccable embalming. But the reality of it is, if you've ever been to a historic cemetery, you probably have noticed there's a lot of divots. It's kind of the uneven ground they're trying to walk. And that happens because as time goes on and our bodies break down, they sort of cave in a little bit, and then the casket will break down over time as well and do the same. And so the dirt sort of caves in and sort of dents down. So the real reason that they want cement vaults is that even though that breakdown still happens, it helps to keep the ground level and it makes it safer to drive the lawnmower. Which, I've never met anybody that didn't think that made sense. I wish that they would be honest with consumers and help them manage their expectations, because none of us want to be buried in an ugly cemetery. We want one that's well taken care of. So if they would just say, like, hey, we want to be able to mow the lawn, I think a lot of us would be like, yeah, that makes sense. But they get to make those rules about whether or not that's a thing that's required, and it could be another thing that you're expected to pay for. And again, they get to control the sort of aesthetic of their property. So they get to make rules if they want about the sizes or types of monuments. So if there's a particular product you have your heart set on, it's important to understand what sort of rules the cemetery might have. If it doesn't match the aesthetic of the rest of the cemetery, this is a private business and they get to make those determinations. The thing that really just gets my goat continually is that they're actually not required to provide you a price list the way that funeral homes are. So it can be extremely challenging to get quality information that's really clear about what sort of costs are associated with burial. So back to some of the more exciting, newer options. I'd love to tell you a little bit about natural organic reduction. And there's an image over to the right from our pals over at Return Home, and I love it. It's so beautiful, kind of a top-down view inside of a vessel. So this process was started back in right around 2017 under a different name called the Urban Death Project. So you can see why maybe there was a little bit of rebranding done, and now they're known as Recompose. This project was the brainchild of Katrina Spade, who's credited with inventing the idea of human composting. She worked really closely with Western Carolina University's Forensic Anthropology Department and our own Washington State University to do some test cases to make sure this process actually worked and was safe and effective. And it was, and it's pretty amazing. It was legalized back in 2019 here in Washington. We were the first state that legalized it, and the first facility doing this type of care for people opened in 2020. So here's a couple more images for you. Up on the upper left-hand side, that's Katrina Spade with one of the vessels at her business Recompose. Down on the bottom, that is Micah Truman. He runs Return Home, which is a different business that offers this service. And I've got two photos of his business, just to kind of give an idea. I got to do a tour shortly after he opened up. And on the left-hand side, down on the bottom, you can see they hadn't yet installed any of their art or anything. They had only just moved in. And it kind of looked like a spooky Costco. I feel like it was such an upgrade on the right-hand side when they got all of the art installed and made it, more of a space for families to come and be in community with their loved ones. It's a beautiful space, lots of lovely murals and really good seating, but just two different takes on the same process. So again, this is something you might have heard called a bunch of different names. I get people all the time telling me, I saw this thing on Facebook, or you'll never believe what I heard on YouTube. Do you know about this? And yeah, it's maybe called human composting, sometimes called recomposition or terramation. Here in the state of Washington, it's called natural organic reduction legally. When we did our price survey in 2022, we found that it had already become available at 20% of Washington funeral homes through subcontracting relationships. And again, there's a pretty big price range. At the time, we found that you could get this service for about $3,900, $4,000 there, up to about $7,000. Oh, so I think I'm missing a slide here. Anyway, I thought I would just give you a little bit more information about this process. It can take between 6 and 8 weeks. And this is a lot like your kitchen compost. This is going to be in a vessel, one person with different types of, gosh, I don't even know what to call it. You have a lot of times you talk about your wets and your dries. You want to have, either wood chips or straw, and there will be plants. And, it's a certain amount of airflow through there. It's really important to help encourage that microbial growth that normally takes place to help break our bodies down. And so these vessels are rotated periodically to make sure that that's happening evenly throughout the vessel. And by the end, depending again on the composition of your body, by 6 to 8 weeks, you're going to end up with this really beautiful nutrient-rich soil returned to your family. And I find that people are quite shocked by the volume of what's returned to them. The amount of soil you get back is enough to fill the bed of a pickup truck, which is pretty stunning. So I think that it's important to know that, even for the most avid gardener among us, that is probably more soil than we could really reasonably find a good home for. So if you're in the position that, this is an option you're really excited about, many people will tell me, I want to be a tree when I die. This is the option that's going to get you the closest to this. But you should know that it's not going to be one tree. You're going to be a forest. There's going to be a lot to work with there. And so there's this really wonderful thing. All of the businesses that are offering this service, they've partnered up with different land trusts around the state of Washington so that you can donate soil that you don't need to help rehabilitate exploited land here in Washington. And it can be such a wonderful way to fulfill that dream that you have of being a tree. And so just such a wonderful thing. You can keep as much of the soil as you'd like. You can donate the extra. You can do all kinds of wonderful things to help use your body to physically nourish plant life, which is an incredibly meaningful process for many people. So I mentioned a little bit about participatory death care earlier, and also that you don't have to work with a funeral home. You get to really decide what parts of their help would be helpful for you or not. And you get to kind of do that in a way that's actually legally protected here in Washington. You can decide, do you want to be involved in the preparation of a body before that cremation or that burial takes place? Many people find a lot of value in having the chance to wash and dress their loved ones. I've spoken to people before where they said, gosh, it was just, my mom was so vain. She would have been so upset if I didn't make sure she left the home in her favorite lipstick, or it's really meaningful to, give your dad one last shave, make sure he looks sharp on the way out. You can keep a body in your home for up to 3 days by Washington state law. There are some things that you'll probably want to do to make sure that that process is as smooth as it can be. If you've never cared for a body in your own home, I do strongly recommend that you collaborate with a funeral home or with a death doula to give you some guidance on what are the ways that you can wash and dress this body in a way that's safe for you so you don't throw your back out while you're already grieving, as well as to make sure that you're keeping the body cool enough to slow the decomposition process so there aren't any offensive smells or anything. But this can be a wonderful way to, really give back and yeah, just I don't know that I think that from what I've heard, this is a process that can be extremely valuable for people that have lost kids, especially, where you really just want this chance to yeah, just use your hands to love somebody. And this can even extend to transporting your person to the crematory, to the cemetery. You get to decide which of these pieces are meaningful for you. And there's a lot of opportunity for you to collaborate with a funeral home on these things. Maybe you don't necessarily have the space in your apartment to wash your loved one, but there's many funeral homes that will allow you the space in their funeral home to come and do the washing and dressing yourself. So it really just has to be a conversation about what do you want to do yourself? What will you need help with? And there's just so many wonderful ways to bring your community together to care for someone. And it's such a wonderful return back to the way that we did death care before it was professionalized in the US. Here in Washington, full body donation is actually extremely popular. If you've ever said to someone, I'm kind of curious about donating my body to science. That's what this is. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that if that's something you're interested in. Most commonly, people will donate their bodies to med schools like Washington State University or the University of Washington. You can also donate to our Washington Mortuary School, the Lake Washington Technical Institute, where new funeral directors learn how to embalm. And I know that there's quite a few for-profit body donation programs out there, but admittedly, it's kind of outside of my realm of expertise. If this is something that's interesting to you, there's two things I really recommend you do. The first is that there's a book that you should read. It's called Stiff, The Curious Life of Cadavers by Mary Roach. And it really spells out for you, what does it mean to donate your body to science? And I think it's really important that if this is something that you think you want to do, you want to make sure you inform yourself what that might look like, because it might be a little bit different than you're expecting, and it might not be something you're comfortable with. It's important you make an informed choice. But if you know for sure that you want to donate, you need to make a backup plan. I think many people are surprised by this, and I actually was a little bit surprised when I first learned. Here in Washington, so many people donate their bodies that they don't accept every donation. So you actually have to apply ahead of time, which to me seems sort of like insult to injury to have to apply to UW again after they've already told me no once. But there are forms on their website where you want to let them know, this is my intention, and they can't guarantee you a spot if at the time you pass, there's no room at the inn, or maybe the circumstances of your death are such that they can't accommodate you. You've got to have a backup plan. So you need to make sure that you talk with your family about what an alternative that you could be comfortable with would be, if you just want a simple cremation, or, you kind of want to give them like a ranked list. My dream is to be donated. And if that can't happen, I want a green burial, kind of work through some things that you might be willing to compromise on. And kind of related to that is organ and tissue donation. Sometimes people are a little bit anxious about, I kind of want to do this thing, but I'm worried it would impact my ability to donate my organs or tissues. Well, the first thing you should really do with that is reach out to our to Life Center Northwest, and this is the organization in our region that works with Donate Life. They handle organ donation, and I think that it's important that you can make a lot of decisions. Really spell out the way that you want your donation to take place. Many people tell me like, gosh, I wish that I could be okay with this process. I just think it's such a beautiful and wonderful way to give back, but I just don't want anybody touching my eyes. It's too creepy. That's a really common concern. And actually, you do have the ability to say which organs and tissues that you're comfortable donating and which you don't want to. So you do have more control over this. But it's important to know that, it's not enough to have the little sticker on your driver's license. You actually have to be registered with these specific organizations as a donor. And make sure that you're talking with your family about that, because it is a deeply unpleasant conversation to leave with your medical team if you never told your family this was something you wanted. It's going to be a real shock. So talk with them about what your wants and your needs are, so that way everybody's on the same page, and then that means that everyone's on the same team for getting you the care that you want. None of these options, of these death care options, are impacted by you being an organ or tissue donor. You can be buried, cremated, aquamated, donor. Well, aquamated or composted with these options, there's the possibility that if you're a donor, you might not be able to do full body donation because generally they would want an intact body for whatever they're studying. But I could be wrong. And this is a really common practice to donate different organs and tissues. And so funeral homes and hospitals are very used to this process. So you don't have to worry that there's going to be any miscommunication. It's sort of a well-oiled machine. Once the folks at Life Center Northwest come to the hospital where you are and they do their work, once they're done, those folks will let your care team and your family know. And then that's when the funeral home comes and gets your body and handles your care from there. So one thing, every time I work with these folks, they always say, I wish that more people knew that they shouldn't rule themselves out. You might think like, oh, I'm old, or I've got a bad liver, or, this and that and the other thing. But, there might still be meaningful ways that you could donate something. So they say, don't rule yourself out. If you've got questions, you should reach out to them directly to learn more about that. So this is a lot. It seems like there's a lot of decisions to be made around services and merchandise and ceremony, and you might even have religious and cultural traditions to take into consideration. It's a lot, and it's pretty stressful. And it's kind of seeing the sheer amount of moving parts for many people makes them kind of shut down. It's involves thinking about your mortality a lot. And that's pretty stressful. And so as much as I want you to, get off of this Zoom call right now and go do your paperwork, if you're not ready, there's some other things that you can do. And one of those things is you could write a values letter. If you're not really sure what you want, you can kind of give your family broader guidelines. You can do something like say, well, the most important thing to me is to keep things simple. I don't want you making a big fuss, and I don't want you spending a lot of money. So do whatever is, whatever feels right with that in mind. Or, like I said, I'm a tree hugger, so maybe I'll say something like, well, I want the greenest possible option given the circumstances. I took my recyclable bag to the grocery store, and I've been a vegetarian for 25 years, and everything to me is the most important is to give back to the earth. So I just want you to make a choice that is respectful of the earth. And that's me sharing my values and giving my family kind of some wiggle room on how that looks, because my dream might be to be composted, but I might pass, doing some adventure safari in South Africa, and it might be a little tricky to get my body home to be composted. So I'm kind of opening this up a little bit to allow a little bit of interpretation. So some people find that to be kind of a helpful in between if you don't have strong feelings about this stuff or you're not ready. And if you join us for some of our future sessions in the Ducks in a Row series, we're going to talk about applying that same logic as well to some of your healthcare decisions, because it's a lot to imagine and to sit and think about and sit with your mortality. And these issues can make it really tough to make choices. And so you're not alone in that. And again, just to drive home, again, this is often one of the biggest sticking points in death care is this question about who's going to pay these bills. And if you don't have those open and honest conversations with your loved ones about the type of care you need, and you don't have a plan in place, it can get really chaotic and really difficult for your loved ones. And so, if you want a particular person to make sure that everything happens the way you want, you need a designated agent. You need to do some financial planning. The cost for this is going to come out of your estate if your designated agent doesn't pay for it. And in the event that you don't have any money at all, there's only a very limited amount of funding available for indigent cremations through Washington counties. And it's not where anybody wants to be. The counties work really hard to, lovingly and respectfully care for your bodies, but it's a really limited resource, and it's not the best case scenario. At PMA, we're really proud to be able to offer a funeral financial assistance fund, but again, it's a really limited fund, and we're never able to help as many families as we want to. So these conversations, as difficult as they can be, can really help prevent a lot of extra and unneeded heartache for the people that love you. So I hope I've given you kind of an appreciation for the value of shopping around. By federal law, that 1984 funeral I told you about, funeral homes are required to give you their general price list if you set foot on their premises. They're required by law to give you a quote over the phone. Luckily, we've been really holding their feet to the fire here in Washington. So we have the highest rate in the nation of funeral homes publishing their prices on their website. It's 54%, which To the uninitiated, that might seem a little low, but the national rate for publishing prices online is like 16%. So we're working really hard to actually amend this federal law to require them to do that because it's just such a huge burden on you when you've lost someone to have to drive all over creation or spend your whole day on the phone trying to gather this information. And so we're trying to lessen the burden on you by making that price survey available to you on our website for free. And, if you ever have any questions about any of this stuff, we want you to reach out to us. We're an education and advocacy nonprofit. And so we're not much if we can't do anything to educate and advocate for you. So these are kind of some of the things that people take into consideration when they're making decisions about their death care, like which funeral home to use. And this is where that price comparison thing comes in. We've got some colleagues over the National Home Funeral Alliance that estimate that funerals are the third largest expense during your lifetime, behind your home and your car. And for an expense that large, you got to be doing your research. This isn't something to be done lightly. There's, just you want to treat this like those other big purchases, like if your fridge were to go out, you're not just going to walk into, well, I guess Sears is probably out of business now, but walk into a department store and just buy the first fridge you saw. You're going to want one that matches your other appliances and you got strong feelings about the vertical or horizontal doors. You want to get a good deal. You want a good warranty. You're going to spend probably a lot less on that fridge than you would on your funeral. And so you want to apply those same smart consumer practices into shopping for death care. And that doesn't mean anything bad. Sometimes people will say, I don't want to be crass. I don't want to be rude by asking about money. But all of this is to help support you get the care that you want within the confines of what your budget and your needs are. So questions about price and the quality of what's being offered at that funeral home are important. You can ask questions about the reputation of that business in the community. Who owns them? No, generally, when folks will choose a funeral home, it's predominantly based on what the closest funeral home to the person that's passed is. Close second to that is, what kind of services are being offered there, because not every funeral home offers the same services. And I know it sounds kind of weird to suggest this, but I strongly suggest that you look at things like Yelp or Google when you're doing this research. I will caution you that generally the only time any of us write a review is when we've got something to say. But, maybe you can notice a pattern. If there's a few things, there's something being mentioned in a lot of reviews, maybe there's something to be seen there. But these are tools that are at your disposal, and I encourage you to use them so you can make informed choices. Yeah.
If someone were to put money in a savings account and they use a funeral home as a beneficiary, does that work for my family to get services?
Yeah, I'm going to do that in a second. So that's actually a really great question to take us into this question of like, how do you finance this care? Because I think a lot of people were probably surprised by how large some of these numbers were. It's important to know that generally when someone wants to prepay for their funeral care, it's because they want to lock a price in. But it's really important to know that it's extremely rare to find a funeral home that will allow you to lock a price in if you prepay. This was a really common practice in the 60s and 70s, but now with all these damn vitamins and vaccines and seatbelts, people sure do live a lot longer, healthier lives. And that means that funeral homes were losing out on a lot of money by guaranteeing those prices when you can go on to live a very full life. So if that's the reason that you want it, you should know that it's highly unlikely that that is going to be an option. If you find a funeral home that does say, yeah, we're guaranteeing this price, you make sure you get everything in writing and you read all that fine print, because I have seen a couple of less ethical businesses do some sneaky things that allow them to say the price is locked in without actually doing it. One of them is that they won't include their administrative expenses in the amount that you pay. So you might pay for that amount. The time comes when you pass and your family is expected to pay for a bunch of overhead costs that you didn't anticipate. Additionally, I have seen some funeral homes artificially inflate the cost of that care on the front end in anticipation of the amount of inflation that might take place by the time you pass. So if you get the promise, you just get everything documented and you might have found a diamond in the rough. I hope so. But it's important to know that when you're prepaying, you're really trusting someone to manage that money and do it in a way that you want. And that's not a great fit for all of us. The one time I will suggest prepayment is that if you've got to do a Medicaid spend down, this is a wonderful option to do that. I think you could spend up to like $1,500 earmarked for death care. But whether or not you prepay, we're a nonprofit. We have no skin in the game. We don't care what you do, but you should know that this is a decision best made with your friends and your family. And if you can talk with your bank about it or you have a financial advisor, you need to talk to those folks. this isn't a discussion necessarily to have with the funeral home. I really don't want that to discourage you though from doing some financial planning. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do some smart planning without necessarily committing that money to be managed by someone else. Because one of the biggest reasons that people choose to not prepay is the portability of that money. Here in Washington, we get lots of folks that think, gosh, I cannot do another snowpocalypse, I swear. And I'm moving to Phoenix. You want to be able to up and move with your resources, and that may or may not be possible if you've prepaid with a business up here. So certainly something to also talk about with that funeral home. If you decide you want to prepay, make sure you get an idea of, if there something were to happen where you did need to move those funds, how does that process work? Sometimes there might be penalties associated with pulling that money out. You want to get all the details before you spend your money. If you want to do some financial planning without prepaying, there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can set up a funeral trust account. You can set up a pay on death account with your banking institution, like a special kind of savings account. And this can be a great option if you don't have the lump sum available to set aside right this moment, but you want to stock away money over time. Alternatively, it's really common in Washington for people to take out life insurance policies that specifically pay out for death care expenses. And so all of these are great options. It just kind of depends on your individual finances. And that's a discussion best had with your friends and your family. Talk with your bank, see what kind of options they have available, and if you have access to a financial advisor, talk to them about it. This is a really personal decision that kind of has a lot to do with what your assets look like. And so, really to sum all this up, we're really encouraging you to think about the things you want and make sure you're talking about it with your loved ones, because this stuff shouldn't be secret, and make sure you put it in writing. It really makes it crystal clear, and certainly heads off a few arguments at the pass. There's going to be, no matter the circumstances of a loss, it's always a tough time. And we want to make sure that arguing over paperwork isn't a part of that. And the sooner you do it, the better. We want you to do this today. It's never too early. Sometimes people will tell us they don't want to talk about this stuff because, talking about death might summon it or bring it closer. But, if that were true at all, I talk about death every day from 10 to 6 at my job at PMA, and I have for 6 years. And that would mean I would have no friends if talking about death summoned it. But I will tell you, I have at least 2 friends. So, it's just a superstition. But the sooner you do it, the sooner you can rest in peace. Oh, I cracked myself up. Again, my name is Beverly, and I'm with People's Memorial Association. Here is our email and our phone number, and I encourage you to reach out to us at any time. Our job is literally just to answer your questions, and I guarantee that whatever you're curious about is not the weirdest thing we've even talked about today. And if it's going to take a little bit of stress off of your back to have an answer to your question, that's what we care about. So we want to hear from you. Let me go ahead and open up some questions. I know it is, okay, so Emily is asking folks to go ahead and send questions over, and you can also go ahead and drop those in the chat if you like. I'm happy to tackle as many of those as possible. I don't have anywhere to be this afternoon, so I'm happy to stick around. I know we're a little bit over time right now. Okay. Well, while folks are typing up their questions, let me think. There's definitely some questions that I get really commonly. One thing that I actually was just talking to a friend about yesterday was like, what happens when there's disagreement between my family members about my care? Sometimes maybe your family might be a different religion than you, or maybe, your partner has a different view of how you should be cared for versus them. It's one of the situations in which it's extremely valuable to fill out that designated agent, because you get to decide, who's the tiebreaker, who's the one that ultimately gets the say. And designated agent, that form is actually part of a law here in Washington that was passed in 2011. So whoever you pick gets to be the decider, and it's a legally actionable document. So if you have some anxiety about that, I know I've spoken with a couple of people that I care about, like, gosh, my family, they're maybe a little bit more conservative and they don't really see my marriage as valid because I'm married to someone of the same gender, or they don't understand that I'm not part of their church. I'm just worried that they might steamroll my partner and give me care that I don't think is a good fit. But if you've done the work to make sure that your paperwork is all crystal clear, that is a good way to protect you and make sure that you're getting care that's a good match for the things that you actually want versus, what your family might decide for you. Do we have any questions coming in, Em?
Direct us to the links or website that directs us to the written laws about death in the state.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know the RCWs off the top of my head, but I can certainly pull some up for you and share them in a follow-up email with Emily, and she can share those with folks that are registered. And I can include the slides here today, and then maybe Emily would also include the recording.
Yeah, yeah, I think will be recorded, included, because it takes a little bit to process these.
Okay.
But yeah, we can definitely get the slides out today.
Okay. Oh yeah, perfect. Yeah, so you can expect to get a follow-up email with these resources. I'll go ahead and tack on some other stuff as well as, links to our price survey, those legal documents I mentioned, so that way you can have a copy of those to fill out when you're ready. Yeah, what other questions we got?
That's,
That's a good one.
thank you for, the question, or thank you for, and that's.
Oh, that's an easy day. What about you, Em? Do you have any questions? I know you've been to 1,000 of these, but there's always something.
Funny today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm too good at this presentation.
Oh, this is a great question.
Ooh, lay it on me.
This is, do you think, might be happening in the future that isn't happening yet? Calls from the field that are trickling down?
Well, there's one that I've been following pretty closely. I don't know how practical it is, but there are two kind of things that are connected. So, if you ever want a really bizarre and interesting sort of YouTube spiral, you should look out for how Walt Disney had his body cared for. And he was one of the folks that chose cryogenics. And so there's a whole lot of scientists that have spent decades now working to, sort of suspend life frozen and reanimate it later on. They haven't made a lot of progress, I must say. It's a pretty tough, a pretty tall order, but sort of kind of related is that there are some folks that have been working, I want to say down in Arizona actually, to do kind of a freeze drying process with bodies. And it's another alternative that would be a little bit less energy intensive, and that would allow you to break the body down into pieces like into ashes. I want to say using nitrogen. I think it's still, in the process, and I'm not sure that it necessarily will be less resource intensive because, of course, you're going to need access to the chemicals necessary to reduce the body that way. But I think it's certainly an interesting option. If they can figure out a good way to do it, I bet that would be another really popular, simple, sort of no frills option that would speak to folks. Yeah, that's kind of the only thing that I know of right now. There's one of the things that I'm really excited about is I'm really fascinated by the science of, the ecological options. And so there's lots of really cool research happening. Because sometimes people are a little bit worried that, all this stuff, this green stuff sounds lovely. It's not for me. I'm really worried that my traditions are going to go away. And so I want to reassure you that if even after all of this, you still are really married to the idea of a conventional cremation or conventional burial, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's very valid. But there are some really wonderful things that are happening from different researchers to try and mitigate some of the negative environmental impacts of those conventional options to make them safer while preserving them. So like there's folks that are working to create soil amendments that you can like mix with cremated remains to make them less alkaline so that they're safer when you scatter and less damaging to plant life. Or people that are looking at like, can we harness the greenhouse gases that are released during the cremation process and capture them and use them for like energy capture? And then that would make the crematory more energy efficient. Or people that are looking at alkaline hydrolysis and saying, like, what are the ways that maybe we could use non-potable water instead, so it reduces the burden of water needs for that process. So there's just like a lot of really beautiful innovation happening to take the existing stuff and make it safer and more efficient and more sort of environmentally friendly, which I think is really exciting because it's to me like all these scientists are getting together and being like, how can we make sure that like we can do all the things that we love for the people we love and also love the earth, which, really resonates with me as such a tree hugger. So that's stuff I get really fired up about.
you have any connections to help with similar organizations in other states?
Yeah. So at PMA, we're the oldest and largest memorial society in the country, but there's many others. There's a national organization called the Funeral Consumers Alliance, and they have kind of under their umbrella a bunch of small organizations scattered around the country. So a lot of times when folks are looking for similar businesses to ours, I'll suggest they reach out to the folks at the FCA for some guidance on, are there similar organizations in, your local area? And if not, sometimes they have connections to sort of consumer-based groups. Like, there might not be a fully fledged memorial society in your state, but there might be a Facebook group where people kind of get together and share resources on price surveys or, business reviews and stuff like that. And it's not as robust, but there's a lot of really great consumer-driven work happening around the country because that's really how innovation in this space happens is consumers say, gosh, I'm really not getting my needs met. I'm going to team up with some other people and we're going to do better. And that's really how PMA got started back in 1939. So I often suggest people start with the FCA and see, what have they got to share, and they can often sort of give you some direction in your research process. Yeah. Do you have any questions, Casey? Is there anything you get asked pretty frequently that you would like us to talk about?
So well. I don't have to the questions.
We're too good at our jobs. Well, that's okay. I know it's, a lot of times people will tell me this presentation's like trying to take a little sip from a fire hose. So if later on it's like 11 o'clock tonight and you're washing your hair and you think, oh my God, I have a question, this is not the last time we're going to talk. You can reach out to us at PMA at any time, send us an email, give us a call, and we're happy to address whatever your question is. So you don't have to come up with it right this second. And I also find a lot of times people have questions and they're worried, I don't want my friends to think I'm a dork for not knowing this, or I don't want people to think I'm morbid. And I guarantee we won't think you're a dork. We won't call you morbid. All of your questions are totally valid. So please use this contact information and reach out to us anytime. It's what we're here for. It's what we've been here for 85 years. So thank you so much for joining me today. I know there's a lot going on in the world, and maybe this is not the most compelling thing that you could be doing today, but it means a lot that you're ready to entertain this information and listen and think and talk. And, we just hope to continue to be that resource for you. So I'm really grateful to the Seattle Public Library for this continued collaboration. And I hope maybe I'll see a couple of you in the coming weeks at our other sessions on estate planning and advanced directives for healthcare.